Hello, everyone. Let me just walk you through the basic concepts in StepZen as to how you would actually build graph. Our view is that the graph should actually be composed and assembled through a set of subgraphs. You may have a subgraph that represents some data in some domain. For example, it might be in a database, and you'll use a declarative construct called dbQuery to connect to it. Or you may have a subgraph that comes from some REST backend or a set of REST backends, and you may use @REST calls. Or you may actually have a subgraph that represents a remote subgraph that some other team has actually built. And so what you have done is you have actually built out these subgraphs using these various constructs, and then you build a supergraph by connecting these subgraphs together. Okay, so let's kind of walk you through what exactly is happening here. So each of those subgraphs can be built either by us. You just point us to a remote backend, and we go and introspect it. So you may point us to a REST or a SOAP backend. We'll do a StepZen import curl, and we'll generate a subgraph. You can point us to a database, or you can point us to, as I said, to point us to a remote GraphQL endpoint, and then we'll kind of introspect it and build your own kind of subgraph. So we can actually build it for you, or you can decide to build it. You can build your own GraphQL schema and types and just annotate them with @REST and @DB queries. And you can start from left or start from right or mix and match or whatever else it is. And then once you have these subgraphs, let's say that you have a customer subgraph and you have an order subgraph, how do you actually connect the dots? The way you connect the dots is by adding fields on one side that reference queries on the other. So in this case, for example, we are adding a field called orders that says that customer has a field called orders, and the way you actually materialize orders is by issuing a query against the order subgraph, okay, and passing the data over to the other side, and then taking the results and bringing it back, okay. And we make the right set of smart decisions with respect to what data should we pass, but you can of course override our decisions and everything else. We actually don't care how each of those subgraphs is built. The subgraph can be built in StepZen, hopefully, but it can be built using any of your favorite tools or toolings and everything else. And it is just a question of how do you actually assemble these things together. Okay. Now, a lot of hard stuff also happens automatically because we have built out a service where you can take these assembled subgraphs and give it to us, and we actually run it as a service with very high availability and very low latency and scale and auto protection and everything else. And we are able to do all the parallelisms and caching and optimizations because we understand how these things are built. You can test it for yourself, but of course you can decide to use our service, or if you want, we can deploy it on your private cloud or wherever you want it to be. Okay, so now let's get started. So I built out in this case, I'm just going to show you how two subgraphs can be brought together. Two GraphQL endpoints can be actually brought together. So I built out a GraphQL endpoint that deals with customer and order data and is able to fetch for that customer what his orders are and what the weather in his location is, et cetera, et cetera. And this is basically going against this built in StepZen, and is going against an Airtable, a MySQL, an Open Weather Map, and is actually running on an endpoint called API/basic demo on my account on StepZen. Okay. Similarly, we have another endpoint for delivery where you can give it a tracking ID and a carrier, and is able to query that particular carrier and determine the right data. And in this case, for this particular tracking ID, it has actually been delivered. Okay. So now we've got these two endpoints. Now let's actually bring them together and stitch them together. Okay. So it's as simple. If you put your attention to the right hand side, okay, I'm going to do a StepZen import GraphQL. I'm going to call this stitch endpoint as basic federation. Okay. I'm going to first import this endpoint, which is the very first endpoint that I showed you. I've made it open so that I don't have to leak my keys here. And it's done. And I've imported that endpoint here. So for example, if you look at my basic federation, I now have a proxy for that entire remote stuff, and it is connecting using @GraphQL calls. Okay, now let's do the same thing. Let's do the second one. So let's again do an StepZen import GraphQL, and in this case, let's import the delivery one. Okay, again, I've made it open so that you don't have to copy anything. I don't leak anything, and that's also now come in. And now that's my second endpoint that's been imported and has got all the delivery data associated with it. Okay, great. And now if I for example deploy this, then I get I'll get a kind of a local proxy associated with this, but it actually gets deployed in stepzen.net/API Basic Federation. And let's go take a look at this one. And I've got all the stuff that I got before. I can go and execute this particular query. Now I'm executing this query against my federation tier, and it's routing it appropriately and getting the data from this. So I've got that. I've got delivery information. But now let's actually connect the two. So I've got the customer subgraph. I've got the delivery subgraph. Now let's connect the two. It's really, really simple in StepZen, as I said. Let's go create a new file called, since I'm going to connect order to delivery, I'll just name it. It doesn't really matter what you name it, but in this case, sometimes it makes sense to name it. And I'll extend type order, okay, with a new field called delivery that returns stuff of type delivery. Actually, delivery is an interface because it can go through DHL and FedEx and UPS. It doesn't really matter at this point. And all I'm doing is saying that, look, you'll call a query called delivery, okay? And that's it. That's how you're actually going to materialize this particular, the delivery information in the context of the order information. Now let's do one more thing. Let's just make sure that StepZen actually deploys this also. So let's make sure that we add to it order delivery dot GraphQL. Okay, and let's save everything. And we are I made a mistake. Sorry, I fat fingered it as expected at this point in time. So let's make sure. One of the advantages of everything being declarative is that we are able to actually verify and test and check for correctness and everything else. So you saw how I made a mistake and it didn't let me deploy because it actually did this. Okay, so now this has been deployed. And now let's go and see. So I've got delivery information, I've got customer information, but I've got one more thing. Now, in the context of orders, I've got delivery. I have stitched delivery in the context of orders. And now let me go and get this. And this particular thing has gone and done a remote call to my customer order subsystem. And within that context, it has then gone and done a remote call against the delivery subsystem, and it is combined and stitched the two. And you saw how fast it was because just an awesome service that actually runs. So that's it. That's how you actually build your subgraphs and connect the dots. And hopefully you like it and you will sign up on stepzen.com. Thank you very much.